So I spent most of last week and last weekend in the great city of Perth attending various events and doing some sightseeing on the beautiful Swan River. And because of that, I completely missed International Women's Day, or as it has become known in the West, International Whinging Day. Whinging that women have not yet achieved their communist dreams of equality of outcome. And of course, our politicians did their duty making speeches and signalling their virtue for the cause of the women's. Now, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison was also in Perth on International Whinging Day, speaking at the IWD Women in Resources breakfast. For some reason, I wasn't invited. Now, I tried to find video of the full speech, but had no luck. However, several news outfits have the particular snippet of his speech that caused the Outrage machine to go into overdrive. But before we get to that, I think it's worth having a look at some of his other remarks in a different video put together especially for International Women's Day. It's about 3 minutes long, and I'm not going to play it all, but I would like to play a couple of key points. For those that don't know, Morrison has 2 young daughters, and so naturally he talked a lot about the hopes he has for them.
I want them to be absolutely confident that they can chase their dreams, whatever they are, and receive the same rewards for their hard work and their beliefs and their passions as their male counterparts.
Well, luckily Morrison doesn't have to worry about that because his children have been born into a world in which that is already the case.
Of course, I want them to be free from harassment and from violence. You know, when I grew up, my father was a police officer, and he was always very careful about where mum would walk. And so I've always had a strong consciousness of the fact that women just can't just walk around safely in our country, and that was true when I was growing up. It's sadly true today. I would like there to be a time in the future where that was not the case, and my girls would be able to walk the streets a lot more freely and safely than women prior to them and their grandmother and their mother.
Well, I guess it's just as well Morrison doesn't have any sons, since on average they are less safe than women. But this idea that walking the streets is a particular problem for women doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As we are constantly reminded, women are more likely to experience violence from someone they know, not a stranger. In fact, of the women that experienced violence over the last 12 months for which we have data, only 22% experienced violence from a stranger, as opposed to almost half of all men that experience violence. Men are almost 3 times more likely to experience violence from a stranger over the course of a year. The Australian Institute of Criminology tells us that over the last 2-year period for which we have data, 5 women were killed by strangers, as opposed to 58 men. That is, men are more than 11 times more likely to be murdered by a complete stranger. But tell us again, Patricia Carvelis, how there is literally nothing women can do to be safe. So a fairly standard virtue signal with a dash of female oppression and willful ignorance of basic facts. Not unusual for a politician. So now, what did Morrison say at the Perth Women in Resources breakfast that sparked outrage?
In Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, his comments have been, sparking some outrage after saying this on International Women's Day.
We want to see women rise, but we don't want to see women rise only on the basis of others doing worse. We want everybody to do better.
Okay, so the logic there, as you can imagine, Twitter just lit up with criticism over those comments. The Australian Senator Sarah Hanson-Young tweeted this, quote, men who are threatened or worried of women achieving equality is the bloody problem, unquote.
Now, of course, it's not like CNN to misrepresent anyone's comments, but just to make sure, let's see if there's any more context to what Morrison actually said.
See, we're not about setting Australians against each other, trying to push some down to lift others up. That's not in our values. That is an absolutely liberal value, that you don't push some people down to lift some people up. And that is true about gender equality too. We want to see women rise. But we don't want to see women rise only on the basis of others doing worse. We want everybody to do better, and we want to see the rise of women in this country be accelerated to ensure that the overall pace is maintained. And so my plan is to focus on ensuring that we have a strong economy in the future, because I believe that will advance women's interests here in this country. And the programs we've got to accelerate women's interests here in this country will only see a stronger future for my girls, for all of your girls, and all the girls who are here. Happy International Women's Day.
Now, whilst I would agree that it's a mistake to have said this on International Women's Day, there's absolutely nothing wrong with what he said. Yes, it is a liberal value not to push others down to raise others up, but it's not a socialist value. The socialist value, at least in theory, is to push others down to raise others up, but eventually pushing others down results in pushing everyone down. So it's no surprise that Green's socialist idiot and perpetual victim Sarah Hanson-Young waded in with her usual cluelessness. Those of us that still believe equality means equality of opportunity aren't threatened by women achieving equality because women already have equality and have had it for decades. But of course, Sarah Hanson-Young is talking about equality of outcome, and the only way to achieve equality of outcome is to push others down to raise others up. That's exactly what a gender quota is. And given the push for gender quotas across the public service and increasingly in the private sector, it's an important point. There are quotas for the New South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, all state police departments, the Australian Defence Forces, the Australian Federal Police. The film and TV industry is now in on the act, scrutinising the gender and ethnicity of every creative team that applies for film, television or documentary subsidies. Screen New South Wales introduced a new rule that all TV drama series must now include female key creatives on their team in order to receive development or production finance. The ASX, rather than worrying about the interests of shareholders, is now obsessed with upping the representation of women on corporate boards, despite there being no substantive evidence that more women on corporate boards leads to better corporate performance. As I said, the only faux pas on Morrison's part is to bring this up on International Women's Day. But I have no sympathy for Morrison and his government. His government has done nothing to wind back discriminatory quotas based on sex. They wholeheartedly endorse the funding of the sexist domestic violence industrial complex and even paid lip service to the non-problem of the gender pay gap. And Morrison then made it worse when he tried to defend his comments. What I was saying yesterday was I don't want to see this agenda pursued by setting women against men. I want to bring all Australians together to focus on this. I want all Australians to support the advancement of women. Well, I'm sorry, but it's too late for that. Successive governments, including yours, openly advocate for policies that do set men and women against each other. And platitudes like, I want all Australians to support the advancement of women, do exactly that. If you don't want to pit women against men, how about sticking to saying all Australians should support the advancement of all Australians? It's no different to invoking platitudes like, we all need to support stopping violence against women, which is a fine goal. But how about stopping violence against everyone rather than that portion of the population that is least likely on average to experience it? Like Martin Luther King, I too have a dream that one day we will judge people for jobs based not only on the content of their character, but by their qualifications, experience and achievements rather than what's between their legs. And furthermore, I hope one day it'll become a political liability to advocate for the preferential treatment of women at the expense of men, but unfortunately, we're not there yet. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, or even consider supporting the channel on Subscribestar. I'll see you next time.